And joining us now here in Washington, Walter Dellinger. Mr. Dellinger is the former Solicitor General and Assistant Attorney General during the Clinton administration. I was particularly struck by the line, Mr. Dellinger, in which the Attorney General talks about, even if it means that we may ruin a federal case, we're more interested in stopping these guys before they're able to do anything. Your take on that, what does that mean? What is the broader implication of that?
Well, it certainly means that he's correct that we're less concerned about criminal prosecutions because these aren't very deterrable crimes. We need to stop them before we start it. I think one thing else it also means is that they won't have the restraints, the usual protection of liberties that come from the exclusionary rule. You know, if you engage in an illegal search, then the evidence can't be admitted at prosecution. But if you're not going to prosecute, then of course you're not worried or as worried about the exclusionary rule, and whatever limits you choose to follow are therefore going to arise really from the conscience and the law-abidingness of the government officials themselves and their own sense of being judged by history.
There is a temptation at times like this to say, boy, good, I don't care what they do to these guys, the important thing is to catch them before they do anything. My question is, so you catch them, and they haven't done anything yet, what do you do with them?
Well, I think that's what Attorney General Ashcroft is saying, is that the important thing is not prosecution. These people are not very deterrable.
No, I get that part. So you don't prosecute, you can't take them to court, you know you're not going to get a conviction, you're not going to let them run around, so what are you going to do with them?
Well, at some point you may have to release people back and maintain surveillance. I think in a larger sense, we have to keep in mind that for 200 years we've tended to exaggerate the threats to America when we've curtailed liberties, but this time the threats are very, very real.
What about those 600+ people who are in prison right now? Are you altogether clear on what they're doing in there and what kinds of protections they have? And the only reason, as I'm sure you appreciate, the only reason I keep stressing the protections is because if we are willing to overlook protections for the least among us or the most unpopular among us, pretty soon it starts creeping up on the rest of us too.
Well, I think that's right. And the Attorney General said that everyone has been held because of suspicion of an actual criminal violation. It may be a small criminal violation, but prosecutors have always had that authority. I do think that you hit the right point, that we ought to be most concerned about those measures that adversely affect some of us more than they do all of us. I'd be more willing to consider measures that curtail all of our freedoms, like national identity cards or other kinds of surveillance, and those that single out a few individuals. But, you know, we don't sit where the Attorney General sits. We don't see what he sees. We don't know what he knows. They're faced with some very serious circumstances, and I think we have to understand the position that they're in. Now, I would hope they keep a very careful record of what they're doing and of everyone that's been arrested so that they can be judged by history. I think they're willing to be judged by history when the time comes.
We have had several indications from the President on down that we may be dealing with this kind of a situation for years to come. Do you sense that this is going to change the way that law enforcement, particularly federal law enforcement, is going to be operating in this country from here on in?
Absolutely. I think what we've had in our country is a separation between two very different models. We've had the war and foreign intelligence model on the one hand, and then we've had our own domestic law enforcement and criminal justice model, which has much higher standards, much greater due process protections. Those have collapsed into one here. None of us are sure whether this is war or is this domestic law enforcement. Should we be trying to arrest those who did this, or should we be trying to assassinate them?
Sounds to me as though that decision is moving more away from arrest.
Yes, we have always had a sense that on our soil it's about arrest, prosecution, and criminal justice, and in foreign areas it's about war. It's about acting in a proactive way. And I think the fact that for the first time, with the exception of Pearl Harbor, the war has come to our country has caused these boundaries to collapse. And we really need to proceed, I think, with great care as we think our way through. As someone said, we don't want another Hiroshima on our soil smuggled in by terrorists, nor do we want anything like another Japanese internment. So we have to proceed with great caution, where I think Americans have never had to proceed before, where they've had the war model and the criminal justice model at one and the same time in our own territory.
Mr. Dellinger, very good of you to come in. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
When we come back, my colleague Robert Krulwich on a very different war being waged with global implications.